Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a specific era that literally rewired the American political landscape. We're looking at the years immediately following World War II. It was a time when the American government had to perform this incredibly high-stakes tightrope walk. We're talking about an era marked by unprecedented global tension, rapid domestic changes, and a frantic search for the vital center of American politics.
Okay, let's dive into this. How on earth did the optimism of the New Deal suddenly turn into the intense paranoia of the Red Scare? That right there is the central tension of post-war America. Coming out of the war, there was this immense hope to expand on Franklin Roosevelt's domestic vision, but instead, the nation was forced into a dramatic political compromise, completely gripped by the fear of global communism.
Section 1. Forging Cold War Liberalism.
So, to really get this era, we have to look at the man who inherited Roosevelt's legacy, Harry Truman. Truman came in hoping to be a champion of domestic reform, but shifting global realities forced a completely new political framework onto him, which we call Cold War liberalism. It essentially had three main prongs: preserving the core programs of the New Deal welfare state, developing a strong containment policy to oppose Soviet influence worldwide, and fighting so-called subversives at home. And it's important to note, this wasn't really by choice. It was a practical, centrist policy born out of absolute necessity, mostly driven by crises in Europe and the spectacular rise of anti-communism right here in the US.
And this brilliantly illustrates how drastic that shift in national priorities really was. Just look at this. In 1950, defense spending was $13 billion, which was less than a third of the federal budget. But by 1961, it had skyrocketed to $47 billion. To put that into perspective, the Cold War was literally consuming the federal budget. It jumped to fully half of all outlays, fundamentally reshaping the nation's entire economic life. Meanwhile, back at home, organized labor was fiercely demanding post-war gains. They'd just gone through years of wartime sacrifices. But a resurgent conservative Congress pushed back hard. In 1947, they actually passed the Taft-Hartley Act over Truman's veto. This act weakened collective bargaining, allowed states to pass right-to-work laws, and literally forced unions to purge communists from their ranks. So, in essence, Congress effectively contained the labor movement at home, right while the U.S. was trying to contain the Soviets abroad.
Section 2. The 1948 Political Earthquake.
Now, Truman's delicate balancing act almost completely collapsed during his fight for re-election. The old New Deal coalition basically snapped at both edges. On the progressive left, you had Henry A. Wallace breaking away because he strongly opposed America's aggressive actions in the Cold War. Then, over on the right, Southern delegations bolted over a strong civil rights platform. They formed the Dixiecrats and nominated Strom Thurmond, who ardently supported racial segregation. So Truman is left totally stranded in the middle, facing off against moderate Republican Thomas E. Dewey.
Pretty much everyone thought Truman was doomed. There was no way he was going to win. But he goes out and launches this incredibly strenuous cross-country whistle-stop tour, just hammering the quote-unquote do-nothing Republican Congress. And the crowds loved it. They were yelling, "Give 'em hell, Harry!" Defying literally all odds, Truman manages to salvage the campaign, winning 49.6% of the popular vote and 303 electoral votes.
It was such a massive upset that it produced one of the most famous photographs in all of political history. It's that shot of Truman gloatingly holding up a Chicago Daily Tribune with the completely erroneous headline, "Dewey defeats Truman." But despite this huge, very human moment of triumph, it's really vital to note that the conservative coalition in Congress still effectively blocked Truman's ambitious domestic agenda, which he called the Fair Deal.
Section 3. Fueling the Red Scare.
Let's move to the domestic front and see how this builds, because you really can't understand this era without looking at the domestic paranoia. Cold War liberalism was built on this grave, rapidly escalating fear of communist penetration. In 1947, Truman initiates the Loyalty Security Program, and the House Un-American Activities Committee starts its Hollywood hearings. By 1950, former State Department official Alger Hiss is convicted of perjury regarding communist affiliations. And then, by 1953, things reach a boiling point when Julius and Ethel Rosenberg are executed for passing atomic secrets.
To grasp the sheer scale of this, just consider this number: 2,500,000. That is the number of federal employees subjected to investigation for quote-unquote subversive activities under Truman's sweeping 1947 Loyalty Security Program. And a person could be accused for reasons as slight as marching in a 1930s demonstration or, believe it or not, simply signing a petition for public housing.
The casualties of this incredibly vague concept of disloyalty were just vast. The Hollywood 10 went to jail for refusing to testify about their past associations. You had people like Dr. Frank P. Graham, a university president, whose atomic energy clearance was attacked based on past affiliations. In what's often called the Lavender Scare, over 1,000 gay men and lesbians were dismissed from federal jobs, simply deemed unfit. It got to the point where even civil rights groups like the NAACP felt compelled to expel communist sympathizers just to survive the political climate.
Section 4. The McCarthy Era.
The absolute breaking point of the Red Scare was spearheaded by Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin. McCarthy kind of launched himself into orbit with his very specific claim in Wheeling, West Virginia back in 1950. He stood up and said, "I have here in my hand a list of 205 members of the Communist Party." He claimed they were actively shaping policy in the State Department. Now the catch is, he never actually released any proof to back up this list, and his numbers were constantly fluctuating. But his virulent smear campaign successfully capitalized on deep, pre-existing national fears.
Now you might be wondering, how does a guy gain so much power without ever actually identifying a single communist in the government? Well, it was because actual sensational espionage cases, like the Rosenberg trial and the convictions under the Smith Act, validated the public's anxieties. These real-world events essentially gave McCarthy's otherwise wild, baseless charges a very dangerous sheen of credibility with the American public.
But McCarthy eventually flew a bit too close to the sun by targeting the U.S. Army. During the 1954 televised Army McCarthy hearings, his aggressive bullying tactics were broadcast right into the nation's living rooms for everyone to see. His downfall was really crystallized by an Army lawyer named Joseph Welch, who famously fired back, "Have you no sense of decency, sir, at long last?" Punctured like that in front of a live television audience, McCarthy's support completely plummeted, leading to his eventual censure in the Senate.
Section 5. Eisenhower's Modern Republicanism.
All right, so moving into 1952 with the election of war hero Dwight D. Eisenhower, the nation tried to establish a new normal and cool the domestic temperature down a bit. Eisenhower championed something called modern republicanism. This was basically an updated GOP approach aiming to moderate rather than totally dismantle the New Deal state. And he steered a very precarious middle path here. He had to keep conservative Taft Republicans who wanted to gut the welfare state at bay on his right, while also managing liberal Rockefeller Republicans who supported internationalism on his left.
So the crucial point here is how Eisenhower managed this ongoing Cold War without literally bankrupting the country, because containment was expensive. Instead of relying on incredibly costly conventional forces, his administration shifted to what they called a new-look defense policy. This relied heavily on stepping up the production of a massive nuclear arsenal. The idea was to serve as a deterrent through the terrifying threat of massive retaliation.
On the surface, things actually seemed so stable that respected commentators in the 1950s declared the end of ideology. It seemed like Democrats and Republicans agreed broadly on the Cold War and the welfare state. But right below this apparent national calm, profound differences, especially regarding civil rights for African Americans and the future direction of the nation, were beginning to violently stir.
Which leads us with this final, really provocative thought. As we look back at this vital center carved out by Truman and Eisenhower, we have to ask ourselves, was this Cold War consensus a period of necessary pragmatic unity that kept the nation secure? Or was it just a fragile illusion, a temporary lid kept on deep, deep divisions that were just about to explode into the tumultuous 1960s? It's a question that really reshapes how we view modern American history. Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and we'll see you next time.